Hi, do you like obnoxious decks? Do you like decks that prefer not losing over winning? Do you like to tell your opponent what he can and cannot play? Well, have I got the deck for you? Alright, yeah, I'm Super Ladman. Today we're going to be playing Mono White Prison. It's basically, it was a bugged combo. It's kind of an outdated name. It was based around Gideon of the Trials plus Helm of the Host plus Anointed Procession. That was going to be the Mimi combo in the deck. So Helm of the Host basically says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except for the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary, and that token gains haste. Well, you can attach that to Gideon of the Trials, whose 0 ability allows him to become a 4/4 human soldier that's indestructible. Still a planeswalker and prevents all damage that will be dealt to him. So if you zero your Gideon, equip up the Helm of the Host, you actually create 2 Gideons. So I think this deck is also known as Oops, All Gideons. I used to have Anointed Procession in the deck as well, so that if a token would be created, it created twice as many as that. So Helm of the Host would create 2 Gideons every combat step. However, the reason why it's called Awesome Bugged Combo is if you produce too many Gideons, which I have, it stops letting you target Gideons. So I actually had a conversation directly with Chris Clay, who is the game director for Magic Arena, and he wasn't even aware that people were trying to do that. So that made me made me very happy to hear that I'm doing stupid things anyway with the game. But he knows about it now, don't you worry. I don't know if it's at the top of his fixing list. I doubt it, honestly, because it's not really something that needs fixing, and that's coming from me. It's kind of the same as well with Jace's ultimate, who, when he ultimates, he creates 2 copies of himself, I think. That was basically where this Helm of the Host, Gideon of the Trials idea came from, really. I wanted to make all Gideons. So the idea is that if you put Gideons of the Trial with Helm of the Host, you create many Gideons. And Gideon's bottom 0 ability says you get an emblem with, as long as you control a Gideon Planeswalker, you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. So basically, if we can't lose, then our opponents can't win. And that's pretty good for us, right? That means our opponent is free to deck themselves trying. So we could have like 50 Gideons on the field, each of them targeting a separate thing, so no damage could ever be dealt. And as long as we have at least 1 Gideon on the field, we can't lose. So our life total could be minus 1,000,000, and we can't die. So as we are assembling that host, this is also a prison deck as well, and that basically means that we are cutting our opponent off of whatever they end up wanting to do. So in the early game against red deck wins and things like that, we've got 2 copies of Gideon's Reproach. Deals 4 damage to a target attacking or blocking creature for 2 mana, just to supplement the early game aggression. We also have Seal Away as well to do the same kind of thing. 1 and a white. Enchantment with Flash, which means we can cast it anytime we could cast an instant, maybe on our opponent's turn, usually on our opponent's turn. And when it enters the battlefield, it exiles target tapped creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So we lock away our opponent's creatures 1 by 1. And this little combination as well goes kind of well with Settle the Wreckage, which we're only running 1 copy of because we're actually running Fumigates in that place. We do have some in the sideboard, but Settle the Wreckage, people play around this, and when they do, you can punish them with the Seal Away. By not attacking with all of your creatures, you only attack with some, and then we can punish the some. And then they get bored and they attack with all of them, and then we settle them. It's very fun. Thematic Compass is a 2 mana artifact that says pay 3, tap, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, you transform it into what is effectively Maze of Ith. And for those who don't know what Maze of Ith is, this is Spires of Vraska. It taps for 1 colourless mana, and it also has a secondary ability that says untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So Thematic Compass essentially says 1 creature of my choice every single turn is not going to deal combat damage to us anymore. And because it's a land, it makes it very hard to deal with, so we can have up to 2 of these in play at a time, and I actually see both of them quite often actually during matchups. So yeah, being able to slow your opponent down, stop them from attacking, sealing away anything that they've got left, and then wiping the board later down the line with Fumigate. We basically cut off creature-based matchups in game 1 as an option. It's very good against red deck wins, is this deck. and it has some effectiveness against control decks as well. Hopefully I'll get to showcase both of those for you today and for the next few days. Anyway, treasure map, 4 copies of this. This is our card advantage. So treasure map on turn 2 is an artifact. It pays 1 to tap, scries 1, and then you put a landmark counter on treasure map. If there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, you remove those counters, transform treasure map, and then create 3 colourless treasure tokens, which basically ramps us another 3 mana over that. However, we can also use them on the treasure cove as well to tap for colourless, and tap it to sacrifice a treasure as well, and we can start drawing cards. So this allows us to gain card advantage back over our opponent in a controlling kind of matchup. It's very useful, and it allows us to find the answers that we need to our opponent's board. Basically, how we find answers to our opponent's board, if we're not ticking up on creatures with Gideon of the Trials as well. I forgot to mention his other ability as well. +1, untap until your next turn, prevent all damage target permanent would deal, so we can knock out planeswalkers if they're going to deal damage with their pluses like Chandra, or most of the time it's just to hit a big creature or something like that to stop Gideon from being attacked. The more Gideons there are, the less likely they are to be able to deal any kind of damage to us whatsoever, so yeah, it's very good. But how do we prison and lock our opponent out of the game? We use things like Gideon's Intervention. 2 and 2 white for an enchantment. As if Gideon's Intervention enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Your opponents can't cast spells with the chosen name, and it prevents all damage that would be dealt to you and permanents you control by sources of the chosen name. So, if we are against red deck wins, for example, we play Gideon's Intervention down on turn 4. We name On-Crop Crasher. On-Crop Crasher from that point forward can never be cast, so there are usually 3 more copies in our opponent's deck that are completely dead at that point, and any On-Crop Crashers that are currently on the battlefield can no longer deal damage either. They can still do their exerting stuff, but it's actually, that's pretty irrelevant anyway, because we only run 3 creatures in this entire deck, if you discount Karn's minus anyway. So we've got 8 copies of this kind of effect to stop our opponent from casting things, and if you look at our deck and how it's structured, you can imagine how easy it is to stop your opponent from being able to win. As we mentioned, Gideon's 0 allows us to not lose, so eventually we lock our opponent out of being able to win. So if we look at how many win conditions we've got, we can win with Gideon of the Trial, Karn, and Lyra, so we only need 3 of those 8 effects here in order to stop us from winning permanently. So that's the kind of idea behind the deck anyway. So after that, we've got 4 copies of Ixalan's Binding as well. 4 mana, 3 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. And your opponents cannot cast spells with the same name as the exiled card. So what I'll say about this deck is it requires a lot of meta knowledge, really. You need to know what goes into your opponent's deck. So if you're up against red deck wins, you know that they're running 4 copies of On-Crop Crasher and things like that, so you know that naming that card is going to be very good. Against control, by the way, if you're against blue-black or blue-white, Gideon's Intervention can name counterspells as well. So I would recommend, if you don't know what your opponent's counterspell of choice is, name Disallow, because everybody has 4 copies of that given to us for free, so likely to see a lot of control decks using Disallow, so you can actually completely cut your opponent off of countering spells with Gideon's Intervention. Any non-land permanent you can do with Ixalan's Binding as well. If they play their Teferis, you bind their Teferi, that's 1 win condition off the board. Then they play their Gear Hulk, you bind that, they can't play Gear Hulks anymore. That's the kind of thing, and then if you think that they're going to run bounce spells, you can name a bounce spell with Gideon's Intervention or something like that. Name Cast Out with it, or even bind the Cast Out so that they can no longer do that the rest of the game. So it's basically to lock out your opponent from being able to play Magic the Gathering, which is very good when you're against control, telling them what they can and can't play. Quite literally, in this case, rather than countering one at a time, you just permanently say, you can't cast that for the rest of the game. 1 copy of Settle the Wreckage. We do run a fair few in the sideboard. The only reason we're running 1 of these is because we usually have enough time to get to Fumigate, and Fumigate is much better, to be honest, in this deck. Settle the Wreckage, though, does exile all attacking creatures target player controls. That player may search the library for that many basic land cards, put those onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle their library. So it does actually have its advantages over Fumigate, because it does stop them from going to the graveyard. But we can swap that out with our board wipes in the sideboard if it ends up being relevant. Most of the time, though, we'll probably be able to get to turn 5, because we'll be fogging, essentially, with Gideon's Intervention, locking creatures down with Ixalan's Bindings, and sealing away and reproaching early game creatures. So 9 times out of 10, we probably, unless we've drawn really badly, we will be able to get to that turn 5, wipe the board, destroy all creatures, gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. So we gain all of the life back as well, which is quite nice. We did skip over Karn, Scion of Urza. Nice little bit of card advantage. Doesn't do a great deal, but he is an alternative win condition in his own way as well. 4 mana for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, which is very impressive for a Planeswalker, especially a colourless one. Ticks up, reveals the top 2 cards of your library, an opponent chooses one of them, put that card into your hand, and then exile the other with a silver counter on it. So your opponent's always going to give you the worst card, but you can -1 in order to go get that card if you want it. It says put a card you own with a silver counter on it from exile into your hand. Now, the card that ticks up and puts that card into exile doesn't need to be the card that gets it back out as well. So if your card dies, you can actually play your second card and go immediately for that -1 for those cards. So they're kind of in limbo, but they're a part of your hand all of the same, if you want to think of it that way. To win with Karn, though, we also have a -2 ability there. Creates a 0/0 colourless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So it gets +1/+1 for itself. Then it also gets +1/+1 for helms, treasure maps, treasure tokens, thematic compasses, that kind of thing. We have plenty of artifacts, actually, so Karn's construct tokens can be quite big, although you probably want to be using your treasure tokens anyway to draw cards and get card advantage, because, as we mentioned, if you can't lose, your opponent can't win, so it's not really, we're not really in a rush to win, we'll say. We got 3 copies of Lyra Dawnbringer as well as our third way to close out the game. We don't play many creatures in this deck at all, considering maybe putting these guys in the sideboard and running more board wipes or something like that, but 3 and 2 white, 5 mana total for a 5/5 first strike flying lifelinking angel that is legendary. Another target as well for Helm of the Host, because other angels you control get +1/+1 and have lifelink. So if we have Helm of the Host on the field, we play our Lyra on turn 5. On turn 6, we can equip Helm of the Host to Lyra, and we can swing for 12, because both Lyras will be pumping each other. So every single time you make a copy with Lyra, she gets a little bit bigger every single time. So I think it's a 3-turn clock with Lyra if you've got the Helm of the Host out, because she swings for 12, and then she's swinging for 21 the turn after, actually. So yeah, if you can get them out and they're left untouched, you could do a lot of damage with them, and especially the lifelink as well is devastating. That's basically the deck, although we do have some utility lands in here. We're running 20 planes to, obviously, cast our spells. 1 Archer of Araska to make sure that we have card advantage if treasure map is not available or we've used all of the treasures. We can add 1 colourless mana, sorry. And it also has the City's Blessing on it, Ascend. If you have 10 or more permanents, which with treasure maps it's quite easy to do, we can pay 5, tap it to draw a card, and we can do this each turn, which is quite nice. We draw 2 cards a turn that way. We usually don't have a lot to do in the late game as well, so we'll have a lot of that mana left open. 2 Field of Ruins to take care of pesky little lands. It was a time when Ramunap Ruins was a thing, but most of all it's for Azcanta the Sunken Ruin or anything of that sort. There aren't too many lands you have to worry about these days, maybe even your opponent's Arch of Araska, but having 2 Field of Ruins just to take them out if the time comes, and even thin your deck as well, because when you do sacrifice Field of Ruin, you get to pull a land out of your deck as well, so we can stop the flood, as it were. And we got 2 copies of Scavenger Grounds as well to deal with the graveyard in the main board as well. Pay 2 to sacrifice it to exile all cards from our graveyards. Our graveyard is completely irrelevant, so don't feel afraid to crack the Scavenger Grounds if you need to either blank a Scarab God or even an Azcanta from flipping. So that's basically the main deck. If we go over to the sideboard, we have the missing Settle the Wreckages and Fumigates. If we're up against a creature-based matchup, then we can absolutely lock them out the second game. We're probably 2-0 against creature-based decks quite a lot. Solemnity, running 2 copies against energy-based decks. Not really seen too many of these recently, so maybe we do want to cut the 2 copies of Solemnity. Not quite sure. They're in here anyway. Players can't get counters, which is what energy is, and counters can't be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands as well. So if you see them playing green-black Constrictor or anything like that, Solemnity is very good against that. It stops Walking Ballista from being able to have counters, stops Verdurous Gearhulk from being able to place counters, that kind of thing. 2 copies of Sorcerer's Spyglass, 2 mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you get to look at your opponent's hand and then choose any card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So this is to name planeswalkers like Teferi, like Karn, that kind of thing. We also get a peek at our opponent's hand, which allows us to better name things with Gideon's the intervention, that one. If we know what our opponent's got in hand, we can pretty much create dead cards with it. We name a card that they've got in hand and they can't cast it anymore. Sorcerer's Spyglass doesn't stop you from casting cards, but activated abilities on those cards, which is Planeswalker abilities mostly, is very good. 2 Crook of Condemnation. I think this is the best of the artifact, or of the graveyard hate spells for this deck in particular. 2 mana to pay 1 and tap, exile a card from a graveyard. So in response to your opponent targeting something with a Scarab God, you can exile it away. If you're playing against Godfarer's Gift, you can just exile the board straight away. Godfarer's Gift does exile the creature as an effect, I think, so you can't do that in response with Crook, but you couldn't do that with any of the other graveyard effects, I don't believe so. This one is probably the best one for the situation. We've got 2 copies of Fragmentize as well if we're up against control and they're running cast outs against our enchantments, or even Ixalan's Bindings of their own. Then we get to Fragmentize them away and then reapply our effects again. And finally, 3 copies of Authority of the Consuls for red decks, which are absolutely everywhere these days. 1 white mana for an enchantment. Creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your opponent's control, you gain 1 life. So we're putting our opponent behind in terms of damage on the creature, and it comes into play tapped, which combos quite nicely with Sealed Away as well, which allows us to cast this straight away to take out a creature. I think we have an example of that in one of the matches as well, so that is going to be the deck anyway, guys. If you want to check out the matchups, then there'll be a link at the end of this video if you enjoyed the deck yourself. It's not particularly budget friendly. In fact, it's very, very much not budget friendly. Most of the sideboard is full of rares, but it's a very fun deck to pilot, and it's been doing quite well for me, actually. So hopefully you get to see that in some competitive leagues as well, which I will be going into. Hopefully they do unranked leagues at some point, because I'm really not appreciating having to spend 1,000 gold every single time I do one, but there you go. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, share the video if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to watch the matchups that'll be coming in a second. Alright guys, see you next time. Bye bye.